The living room felt quieter than usual, the hum of the city outside muffled by the thick curtains. Linda sat on the edge of the couch, the delicate family heirloom resting in her palm. It was a gold ring, a symbol of generations of women who had worn it, a silent promise of heritage and legacy. Today, she would pass it on to Sophia, her daughter, in hopes that she would see its value, not just as a ring, but as a piece of their family's history. Sophia. Linda's voice was calm, almost tentative. I want to show you something. Sophia sprawled across the armchair, didn't even look up from her phone. She let out a distracted grunt. Yeah, what? Linda gently placed the ring on the table between them, its soft gleam catching the light. The moment the ring touched the surface, Sophia's eyes flickered briefly before returning to her screen. It's from your grandmother, Linda began, her voice thick with emotion. It's been in the family for generations. Sophia barely glanced at it. She flicked her hair back and leaned back in her chair. Wow, another piece of antique junk. Are you serious, Mom? Linda's chest tightened, but she pressed on. It's not just jewelry, Sophia. It represents our family. It's history. I want you to understand the meaning behind it. Sophia snorted, the sound bitter and dismissive. Mom, it's a ring. What's the big deal? It's just gold and a couple of stones. You act like it's the crown jewels. Linda's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the reaction she had hoped for. She watched as Sophia picked up the ring and twirled it between her fingers, a look of complete indifference on her face. You take everything so seriously, Sophia said, rolling her eyes. You know what I think. You care more about this stupid thing than you care about me. The words hit Linda like a punch. Before she could respond, Sophia suddenly tossed the ring with a flick of her wrist. It flew through the air, spinning for a moment before landing with a sickening clink inside the trash can near the door. Linda stood frozen for a beat. The room seemed to close in around her. Her heart pounded in her ears as she stared at the trash can as if it might spit the ring back out. Sophia's face was unreadable, but there was no apology, no remorse. There, she muttered. Now you can stop whining about it. Happy. The silence in the room was deafening. Linda felt her hands tremble as she fought the urge to scream. She hadn't expected this, not from her daughter, not from the woman she had raised, the woman she had sacrificed so much for. Without saying a word, Linda moved slowly toward the trash can, her feet heavy as she knelt down. She reached into the bin, her hand brushing through the discarded scraps until her fingers wrapped around the cold metal of the ring. She pulled it out, holding it in her palm like a lifeline. But inside something deep and painful cracked. She stood clutching the ring tightly, her chest tight with humiliation. Her heart ached with the betrayal, but there was something else rising inside her. Something that wasn't sadness. Sophia's voice cut through the moment, still distracted by her phone. You spoil them too much, Linda. That's the problem. They don't appreciate a thing. Linda's grip on the ring tightened. She could feel her own anger rising now, an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It was time for this to stop. With the ring hidden in her hand, Linda turned away. For the first time, she didn't look back at her daughter. Sophia had thrown the ring away. But Linda knew now what she had to do. She wasn't going to let her daughter use her, manipulate her, or diminish everything that had taken so much time and effort to build. Not anymore. As Linda walked to the kitchen, the silence behind her grew louder. She didn't need to hear what Mark would say. Didn't need to feel the guilt that always seemed to creep in. This time she wouldn't listen. She wouldn't bend and she wouldn't lose. The phone buzzed again. Linda glanced at it but didn't pick it up. Sophia's name flashed on the screen, the relentless sound filling the silence of the house. Linda let it ring once, then twice, then a third time. The urge to answer, to smooth things over, was almost overwhelming, but she resisted. She hadn't expected this. The bitterness, the cruelty, throwing away something so precious, something that had been passed down through generations, felt like more than just a ring. It felt like a rejection of everything Linda had done for her daughter, everything she had sacrificed. And that was the moment Linda knew she couldn't keep giving, couldn't keep allowing herself to be manipulated. The phone buzzed again a fifth time, but Linda didn't move. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and walked into the living room. The phone sat untouched on the counter, the calls still coming, but this time, Linda wasn't the woman who would pick up. She wasn't the mother who would continue to apologize, to fix things that weren't hers to fix. For years, Linda had bent to Sophia's will. Every argument, every demand, every time her daughter called in a panic, it always ended with Linda giving in. But not anymore. Her hand reached for the phone, but instead of answering Sophia, she dialed a different number. A number that felt like the first step in a new direction. "Grace Miller," the voice on the other end said after just one ring. "It's Linda," Linda said, her voice quieter than she intended. "I need help." There was a brief pause. Then Grace's voice softened as if she had been waiting for this moment. "I'm glad you called. What's going on?" Linda hesitated, feeling the weight of the years of enabling, the years of being the fixer. "Sophia threw away something precious today. Something that's been in our family for generations. Can't keep doing this. I don't know how to stop." Grace's tone shifted, firm but compassionate. "You've been putting everyone else first for too long, Linda. It's time to take control back. You need to start with your finances. Cut her off. She doesn't deserve any more of your sacrifices." Linda closed her eyes, the thought settling in her chest. "I don't know if I can do that." "You can," Grace said, her voice resolute. "I'll help you. It's time you started living for yourself, not for her." Linda's hand tightened around the phone. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect. It was about her own well-being. "Okay," she whispered. "Help me." The conversation was brief, but when Linda hung up, something inside her felt lighter. The relief wasn't immediate, but it was there. She wasn't sure what the future held or how her relationship with Sophia would unfold. But for the first time in years, Linda felt the beginning of something new. Something that didn't involve constantly giving in, constantly losing herself. She stood there in the quiet of her home and allowed herself a moment to just breathe. The phone buzzed again, but this time Linda didn't look at it. She was done waiting for things to change on their own. She was ready to change. The morning light filtered softly through the window, casting a gentle glow on the quiet room. Linda sat at her kitchen table, hands gripping the phone in front of her. The weight of yesterday's decision still hung heavy in the air, but today there was a quiet resolve in her chest. She was done living in the shadows of others' demands. It was time for her to take back control. She grabbed her purse and left the house, the cold air outside feeling sharper than usual. The drive to Carmen's office was quick, but every mile felt like a step toward something. Linda had spent years building her life, her career, her wealth, and now she had to ensure that she didn't lose it all to people who didn't appreciate what she had given them. Carmen was already seated at her desk when Linda walked into her office. The consultant's dark hair framed her sharp features as she looked up. She didn't greet Linda with pleasantries. There was no need. Carmen knew what this meeting was about. "I've been expecting you," Carmen said, motioning for Linda to sit. Linda settled into the chair across from her, laying a thick folder on the desk. "I need to revoke all financial access that Sophia and Mark have to my accounts." Carmen raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about this? You've always been generous to them." "I've been too generous," Linda replied, her voice firm. "It's time to protect myself. I've given everything and it's never been enough." Carmen nodded slowly, understanding the depth of Linda's decision. "Let's get started then." She clicked her pen and began reviewing the paperwork, her fingers moving quickly as she worked through the details. Linda's assets, her investments, everything. Carmen helped her untangle it all, securing Linda's wealth into a new trust that only she would control. By the time they finished, Linda felt a strange sense of relief. Her accounts were now free from Sophia and Mark's reach, and that lingering anxiety that had plagued her for years was finally starting to fade. This was the first real step in reclaiming her life. Later that day, Linda sat at the bank, finalizing the closure of the joint account she had shared with Sophia. The woman behind the counter was polite but efficient. And as Linda signed the last piece of paperwork, it felt like she was closing a door on a chapter of her life that had only ever caused her pain. As she walked out of the bank, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, seeing a message from Sophia. "Hey Mom. I need money for a necessary purchase. Can you send me some?" Linda stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. For years, she would have dropped everything to help her daughter. But today it felt different. There was no guilt, no urgency, just a quiet, resolute understanding that this time she wasn't going to cave. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened the document on her laptop, the one she had been preparing for days, her new will. She revised the clauses, ensuring that Sophia and Mark would not inherit a penny from her unless they showed real respect. When she finished, Linda leaned back, staring at the screen. The relief was slow to come, but it was there. The woman who had given and given until she was empty was gone. In her place was a woman who was finally ready to live for herself. The phone buzzed again with another message from Sophia. Linda didn't read it. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, Linda Harris wasn't waiting for someone else to make her decisions. She was in control, and she wasn't going to lose it again. The evening light had dimmed by the time Linda sat down with a glass of wine in her hand. The weight of the day still hung heavy around her, but there was something different now. She wasn't rushing to answer phone calls or answering demands she didn't want to fulfill. She was reclaiming her peace. Her phone buzzed across the table, interrupting the calm she had been trying to hold on to. Linda picked it up without thinking. It was a voicemail from Sophia. She stared at the screen for a moment, her finger hovering over the play button. A wave of guilt threatened to roll over her, but she swallowed it down, pressing play. Sophia's voice came through the speaker, sounding rushed, desperate. "Mom, it's an emergency. I need a loan, just a small one, but it's really urgent. Please call me back." The words stung more than Linda expected, but they didn't break her. She didn't reach for the phone to call back. Instead, she let the voicemail fade into silence. For a moment, Linda sat still, letting the silence of the room fill her thoughts. The emotions that had risen in her chest earlier, fear, anger, resentment, had faded, leaving a sense of clarity. She remembered all the times this had happened before, when Sophia and Mark would run into trouble, and Linda would be the one to fix it. All those late-night phone calls asking for money to cover bills, loans, emergencies that always seemed to be the same. They never learned. She recalled the number of times she had bailed them out, thinking that if she helped them enough, they would eventually get it. But no matter how many times she gave, no matter how many times she wiped their tears or soothed their panic, it was never enough. They never changed. And now, after everything, Linda finally understood. They didn't want to learn. They didn't want to change. They just wanted more. The realization hit her hard, and Linda placed the glass of wine on the table, her hands resting on the cool surface. She wasn't angry anymore. She was simply exhausted. Exhausted from the years of giving in. Exhausted from the emotional toll it had taken on her. She had given everything, and all it had done was leave her empty. She thought of the new will she had just signed. The decision she had made that now felt like an irreversible step forward. Sophia and Mark would no longer have access to her resources unless they showed real respect. Linda had meant every word. But now she had to figure out how to make sure it stayed that way. How to legally ensure they couldn't come back and manipulate her again. With a sigh, she grabbed her phone and called Grace. The phone rang twice before Grace picked up. "Linda," Grace said, a hint of familiarity in her tone. "What's on your mind?" "I've made the decision," Linda said, her voice steady but resolute. "I can't keep doing this anymore. I need to make sure Sophia and Mark can't get their hands on anything I have. I've changed the will, but I want to make sure they can't come after me in any way." Grace's response was calm and understanding. "I've been expecting you to say that. We'll put everything in place to protect your assets. You don't need to worry about them anymore." Linda felt the knot in her stomach loosen a little. She knew it was the right decision, but the finality of it still sat in her chest. She wasn't just cutting them off financially. She was cutting them off from her life, from her future. She ended the call and set the phone down, staring at it for a moment. The relief wasn't instant, but it was starting to settle in. She wasn't their safety net anymore. She wasn't anyone's safety net. The phone buzzed again. Linda glanced at it, but this time she didn't pick it up. Instead, she let the silence fill the room. For the first time in years, it felt like she was breathing. Linda woke to the soft light of dawn, her mind already moving with purpose. The previous days had been heavy, full of emotional decisions and breakings. But today felt different. Today she would take the next step, making the choices she had put off for far too long. Her phone lay on the table beside her, and with a deep breath, she reached for it. There was no hesitation now. She picked up the receiver and dialed the bank. "Good morning. How can I assist you today?" The woman on the other end greeted. "I need to reduce the credit limits on 2 accounts," Linda said, her voice unwavering. "I want Sophia Harris and Mark Harris's credit limits reduced to 0. There was a brief silence before the woman replied. "Certainly, ma'am. I'll need to confirm some details with you." Linda provided the required information, the simple act of it feeling like a weight lifting off her shoulders. She was cutting ties, cutting off the endless financial tether that had kept her tied to her daughter's and son-in-law's irresponsibility. Once the transaction was confirmed, Linda hung up. She took a deep breath, letting the silence fill the room. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming control. She wasn't just withdrawing her financial support. She was withdrawing her emotional support too. For years, Linda had been the one to pick up the pieces of their messes. But no more. Today, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't expected, a finality that felt empowering. Next, she dialed Grace's number, her lawyer and close friend. The phone rang twice before Grace picked up, her voice calm and steady. "Linda, how's everything?" Grace asked. "I've made the decision," Linda replied, her voice steady. "I've cut them off. I need to make sure that all my accounts are no longer connected to Sophia and Mark. No more access." Grace's voice softened, though there was still the sharpness of understanding. "I'll handle it, Linda. You don't need to worry about them anymore. We'll make sure everything is secure." Linda felt a sense of relief, a little lighter, as she listened to Grace's reassurance. It wasn't just about securing her finances. It was about protecting herself, her heart, her future. Linda wasn't going to let Sophia or Mark manipulate her anymore. She had given enough. When Linda logged into her online accounts later that afternoon, she confirmed everything had been handled. The joint accounts were closed, credit card agreements were revised. There was no more connection, no more liability. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophia. "Mom, why did you cut off my credit? This is ridiculous. I need it for an emergency." Linda stared at the screen for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the response button. Her heart twinged at the familiar request, the same pattern of need she had grown used to. But this time, she didn't feel the pull to drop everything and fix it. This time, she didn't need to respond. Instead, the phone rang and Linda's breath caught when she saw Sophia's name flash across the screen. She picked it up, steadying herself. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Sophia's voice was sharp, laced with frustration. "Why did you do this? Why cut off my credit?" Linda took a deep breath, the words coming easily now, as if they had been waiting to be spoken. "I'm not your ATM anymore." There was a long pause, the silence on the other end palpable. Linda's chest tightened slightly, but she remained resolute. "I'm done," she said softly. "You need to figure it out on your own." Sophia didn't respond. The silence stretched out until the call ended abruptly. Linda placed the phone down with a quiet exhale. For the first time in years, Linda wasn't looking back. The future was uncertain, but at least it was hers to shape. The weeks after cutting off Sophia and Mark were the quietest Linda had known in years. The absence of their constant demands left her room to breathe, but also room to feel the weight of what she had given up. Still, there was a certain lightness to her days now, a newfound space she had never known she could reclaim. It was a Saturday afternoon when Linda's phone buzzed with a text from Lori. Lunch tomorrow, just like old times. Lori had been there through thick and thin, a steady friend who had watched Linda lose herself over the years in the chaos of her daughter's life. They had been close when Linda was working before the weight of motherhood and duty consumed her. And now, after everything, Lori's message felt like a lifeline. Linda didn't hesitate to reply. "Yes, I'd love that." The next day, they met at a small cafe on the corner of their old neighborhood, a place Linda hadn't been in years. The moment Lori saw her, she stood up and enveloped her in a tight hug, the kind that only a true friend could give. Linda felt the familiar warmth, the comfort of someone who knew her well, and wasn't afraid to show up when it mattered most. Over lunch, Lori didn't ask about the specifics of Linda's decision to cut off her daughter, but it didn't matter. Her presence was the balm Linda needed. Lori listened with patience as Linda spoke, occasionally nodding, always offering a word of encouragement. She had been there before, watching Linda sacrifice her happiness for others. But today Lori could see the change. "You finally put yourself first," Lori said softly, as if reading Linda's mind. "It's about time." Linda smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't that she hadn't tried before. She had always tried to balance everything, her career, her family, her own needs. But now, for the first time, she was starting to think of herself as more than just the fixer, the one who made everything right for everyone else. She was Linda Harris, and she had a right to peace. That evening, Linda attended a gathering hosted by a group of women who were focused on empowerment and self-care. It was a diverse group, women of different ages and backgrounds, all sharing stories of rediscovery and reinvention. Linda wasn't sure what to expect. But when she walked into the room, something inside her shifted. For the first time in a long time, she felt she belonged. It wasn't just a group of women talking about their struggles. It was a space where they celebrated each other's growth, where there was no competition, only support. Linda found herself laughing, connecting, sharing parts of herself she hadn't realized she had buried. Later, as the gathering wound down, Linda realized she had spent hours talking about things that mattered to her, her dreams, her desires, things that weren't tied to anyone else's needs. She was learning again how to be herself, separate from the roles she had played for so long. She left the gathering that night with a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. The thought of starting over, of embracing new opportunities, was no longer a daunting prospect. It was a thrilling one. She had spent too long putting others' needs first, but now she was beginning to rediscover the things that made her feel alive. As she walked home, Linda smiled to herself. For the first time in years, she was moving forward, not out of obligation but out of choice. She had the power to shape her future, and with every step, she was embracing that freedom. She wasn't sure what the next chapter would hold, but one thing was certain. She was ready to write it. The morning sun slanted through the windows, casting warm beams across Linda's desk. The quiet of the house felt different now, not suffocating as it once had, but full of possibility. After years of silence, of putting herself second, Linda had finally found her voice. It was time to use it. She opened her laptop, her fingers poised over the keys. For the first time in months, she wasn't writing a list of things to do or an email to her daughter. She was writing her story. She had been working on it for days, piecing together memories, sorting through the tangled emotions that had kept her silent for so long. But now the words were coming easily. She was no longer afraid of them. The story she had been too afraid to tell was spilling out, raw and honest. Linda typed slowly at first, letting the memories flood back. She wrote about her marriage, about her career, about the love she had given to Sophia and Mark, believing it was enough. And then she wrote about the years that followed, the years when she had given too much, when she had been manipulated by guilt, when love had become an excuse for letting herself be used. She typed about the broken promises, the constant expectations, the sacrifices that never seemed to be appreciated, and the betrayal. The moment she had realized that no matter how much she gave, it would never be enough. She typed the words she had never said out loud. I had allowed them to control me, to drain me until there was nothing left, and I had to stop. The clicking of the keyboard was the only sound in the room. And as the last sentence formed on the screen, Linda paused. She had done it. She had told the truth, not just to herself, but to anyone who would listen. After a long breath, Linda hit publish. She didn't expect the immediate response. The blog titled Breaking Free. My journey to independence began to gain traction almost overnight. Comments flooded in. Some supportive, some questioning, but all curious. People who had been through similar experiences, who had struggled with toxic relationships, found their voices in Linda's words. It felt strange, liberating to be so exposed. But Linda didn't flinch. For the first time, she felt like she was truly being seen. The weight of her secret had lifted and she had reclaimed her story. That night, her phone buzzed again. It was Sophia. "Mom, I saw the post." The text read, "Please take it down. This isn't the way to handle things. You don't know what you're doing." Linda stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply button. She could feel the familiar pang of guilt, the same old pull to soften her stance, to backpedal. But she had already made that mistake too many times. She dialed Sophia's number. "Mom, please take it down." Sophia's voice was tight, angry. "Why are you doing this? You're humiliating me." Linda took a breath, the words coming easily now, as if they had been waiting in the wings. "The truth is out, Sophia, and it's your choice whether or not you face it." There was a long silence on the other end. Linda's chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not going to hide anymore," she said softly. "I'm not going to keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. I'm done." Sophia's voice was small now, tinged with something Linda couldn't quite place. "I don't know what you want from me." "I want you to understand," Linda said, the words clear and final. "I've spent my whole life trying to make things right for you. But I can't fix this anymore." The call ended, and Linda stared at the phone in her hand, her pulse quickening. She had said the words, had drawn the line. There was no going back. And for the first time Linda felt no regret. The truth had been set free, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Linda's life had transformed in a way she never thought possible. The space she had created in the aftermath of cutting off her daughter and son-in-law had allowed her to breathe, to feel the freedom she had so long forgotten. No longer bound by the weight of others' expectations, she began to live on her own terms. The mornings were quieter now. Linda found herself waking up earlier, no longer feeling weighed down by the worry of whether she would hear from Sophia again, or if another crisis would demand her attention. Instead, she spent her mornings in peaceful solitude, sipping coffee by the window, watching the world begin anew, just as she was. She started planning trips, small ones at first, a weekend getaway to the coast, a visit to a vineyard she had always wanted to explore. With no one to answer to, Linda found herself craving new experiences, things she had put off for years. The world outside her door felt wide open, and for the first time, Linda felt eager to step into it. Her phone buzzed one afternoon, interrupting her quiet day. It was Kathy, a close friend from her past who had drifted away during the more chaotic years of her life. The message was short, apologetic. "I've been thinking about you. I'm so sorry for everything. Can we talk?" Linda stared at the screen, the familiar pull of guilt gnawing at her. She wanted to respond, to pick up the phone, to repair things the way she had always done. But then she remembered she wasn't responsible for mending every broken relationship. Not anymore. She set the phone down. Her decision final. It wasn't about shutting others out, but about protecting her peace. She had spent too many years chasing after relationships that drained her. Now it was time to focus on the relationships that nurtured her, relationships that helped her grow rather than hold her back. One afternoon, Linda found herself volunteering at a women's shelter, a place where women who had been through their own struggles gathered to find support and rebuild their lives. Linda had no grand plan, but the more she gave, the more she realized how much she still had to offer. The women she helped inspired her, reminded her of the strength she had inside herself. It was a space where women reclaimed their power, and Linda found herself reflecting on her own journey, understanding that her healing could help others. Inspired by this new perspective, Linda began a hobby she had always wanted to pursue: interior design. She started small, redecorating her living room, then moving on to the rest of the house. Each room felt like a reflection of the person she was becoming: brighter, more open, more authentic. She loved how colors and textures came together to create something meaningful. It was a metaphor for her own transformation, one carefully chosen piece at a time. Her life had become a series of small, meaningful changes, each one a step toward reclaiming her identity. And then one evening, Linda attended a women's empowerment event, a gathering of women sharing stories of personal triumph. It was there that she was approached by a representative from a publishing company. "We've been following your story," the woman said, handing Linda her card. "We think you have a book inside of you about reclaiming your independence, about breaking free from the things that hold you back. Would you consider writing it?" Linda stared at the card in her hand, a sense of disbelief washing over her. For years, she had kept her story locked away, afraid of what it might cost to share it. But now, sitting in this room filled with women who had faced their own battles, Linda realized something. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a story that could help others. The idea of writing a book, of sharing her truth with the world, was both terrifying and exhilarating. But Linda didn't flinch. She was no longer afraid to take risks. She wasn't going to shrink back. She smiled, a spark of excitement lighting her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I think I'd like that." For the first time in years, Linda was choosing something for herself. And this time she wasn't looking back. Linda was in the middle of rearranging a shelf when the doorbell rang, piercing the silence she had come to cherish. She froze for a second, her heart fluttering uninvited. No one visited her unannounced anymore. She wiped her hands on the cloth, glanced through the window and saw them. Sophia and Mark standing there looking different, desperate. Her stomach tightened, but she opened the door anyway. "We need to talk," Sophia said, her voice trembling, barely meeting Linda's eyes. Mark stood a step behind her, hands in his pockets, looking a little too calm for Linda's taste. Linda stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. Her heart pounded in her chest as they made their way into the living room, the room she had spent weeks redecorating, making it her sanctuary. It felt foreign now, their presence in it. Sophia sat down first, folding her hands in her lap, looking small in a way Linda hadn't seen in years. "We're sorry, Mom," she began. "We didn't realize how much we were hurting you. We were selfish and we know that now." Mark joined in. "We've been through a lot and we're struggling. We can't keep going like this. We need you, Linda. Please let us try again." Linda stayed standing. She couldn't sit. She wouldn't sit. "No," she said, her voice low but steady. "You've hurt me too many times for me to fall for this again." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "But we're sorry. We've learned, Mom. We're trying. Please give us another chance." Linda felt a flicker of guilt, but it was fleeting. She had been here before. Apology after apology, promise after promise, and she had believed it every time. She had always forgiven them, always stepped back into the chaos. But not anymore. "I'm not your safety net anymore," Linda said, her voice firm. "You've taken enough from me. I have nothing left to give you." Sophia's face crumpled and Mark's jaw tightened, but Linda didn't look away. She knew the script. They'd apologize, beg, guilt, trip. But this time she wasn't following it. She wasn't going to let them drag her back into their mess. "I don't understand," Mark said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're family. How can you just turn your back on us?" Linda's heart ached at his words. But the truth settled in like a weight she had been carrying for years. She had already turned her back. It wasn't out of malice, but out of survival. "I'm done trying to fix things that aren't mine to fix," Linda said softly. "You need to learn to live without me. I've already given you everything I can." The silence stretched between them, suffocating. Sophia's tear-filled eyes pleaded for something Linda could no longer offer. Mark, too, seemed to realize that the game was over. "Goodbye," Linda said, the word finally leaving her mouth like a breath she'd been holding too long. She turned, walking toward the door. "You know where the door is." Sophia and Mark sat frozen for a long moment, but Linda didn't wait for them to speak again. She opened the door and stepped aside. As they slowly stood and made their way out, Linda watched them leave. The heaviness of the past still hanging between them. But this time it was different. When she closed the door behind them, Linda's hand lingered on the knob. She was empty in a way, but she was also free. The weight had lifted, and she could finally breathe. The silence that followed felt different now. She was no longer the person they could lean on. And for the first time in years, Linda felt the first breath of peace. Linda had never imagined her life would take this turn. It had been nearly 6 months since she had cut Sophia and Mark out of her life. And in that time, something remarkable had happened. She had found herself. Her memoir, Breaking Free: My Journey to Independence, had been published just a few weeks ago. She had poured everything into it, the pain, the love, the mistakes. To her surprise, it had become a bestseller. A story that resonated deeply with others. Women in particular reached out, sharing their own tales of abuse, manipulation, and eventual liberation. Linda had been hesitant at first, unsure of how to embrace this new attention. But as the letters, emails, and messages poured in, she realized her words had created a ripple effect. Other women were waking up, realizing that they, too, didn't have to live in someone else's shadow. They didn't have to apologize for setting boundaries. Soon, Linda found herself invited to speak at national events, women's empowerment conferences, fundraisers, panels where her story could inspire others to take charge of their lives. She had become a beacon of strength. And though it still felt surreal, Linda stood taller with every stage she graced. One evening, she was invited to appear on a national TV show, a well-known talk show where guests shared transformative stories. When the host asked her about her journey, Linda's heart swelled with pride. She had become someone entirely new, someone unrecognizable from the woman who had been too afraid to stand up for herself. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, Sophia and Mark reached out again. They tried calling, texting, pleading with Linda to talk, to reconsider, to come back. The familiar sense of guilt crept in, but Linda dismissed it. She had been through too much to let them back in. Linda didn't respond to their messages. She didn't feel the need to explain herself anymore. For the first time in her life, she understood that it wasn't her responsibility to make them understand. They had crossed a line. And now it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. She blocked their numbers, their social media profiles, and continued on her path. Linda had learned the hard way that putting herself first didn't make her selfish. It made her whole. As she stood in front of a crowd at her latest speaking engagement, Linda paused for a moment. She looked out at the sea of women, each of them waiting to hear her words, and realized just how far she had come. She wasn't the same woman who had sacrificed everything for others. She was someone who had taken her life back, piece by piece. In that moment, Linda felt a quiet but powerful certainty in her chest. No one could take her peace from her again. She was free. Truly free. The applause from the crowd washed over her, but she didn't need their validation anymore. She had already found the only approval that mattered, her own. And with that realization, Linda smiled, knowing that whatever the future held, it was hers to embrace unconditionally. Linda stood at the podium of the National Women's Summit, a quiet sense of calm washing over her as she looked out at the sea of women. She'd come so far since the days when she had been buried under the weight of guilt and sacrifice. Now standing in front of a room full of people who could feel her story, she knew that every step of her journey had led her to this moment. She began speaking, her voice steady but full of emotion. For too long I let my life be defined by others. I let their needs, their demands, their mistakes become mine. And somewhere along the way I lost myself. Linda paused, letting the words sink in. She could feel the energy in the room shift as women nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. But she continued, I learned something powerful. We all have the power to change our lives. It starts with saying no, with setting boundaries, with understanding that we are worthy of peace, respect, and financial independence. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Linda had never imagined herself as a speaker. But now, standing here, she felt like she had found her true purpose. This wasn't just about her story. It was about all the women who needed to hear it, who needed to know that they didn't have to live for others. They could choose themselves. After her speech, Linda was met with applause. But it wasn't the applause that made her heart swell. It was the dozens of messages that poured in afterward. Women who had been inspired by her journey, who were now taking their own first steps toward independence. The messages spoke of empowerment, of taking control of their finances, and of breaking free from the toxic relationships they had been stuck in for far too long. Linda didn't just leave it there. She realized she had a responsibility to keep giving back, to help others reclaim their lives the way she had. She began mentoring young women, offering guidance on financial independence and self-worth. It wasn't just about money. It was about the power to stand on your own, to make decisions that were yours and yours alone. As her foundation grew, Linda began hosting workshops offering scholarships for women seeking financial education. She could see the transformation in their eyes just like her own. Their faces were filled with a mix of fear and hope. And with every class, every session, Linda felt like she was passing on something she never thought she would have, the ability to shape her own future. One evening after a particularly successful event, Linda sat in her office reading through the letters and messages she had received. One from a young woman stood out. "You helped me leave an abusive relationship. Your story gave me the strength to walk away and rebuild my life." Linda wiped a tear from her cheek. This was what it was all for, to help others find their strength, to help them create a life on their terms. The future felt uncertain. But for the first time, Linda was embracing it with open arms. She was no longer afraid. The woman she had become wasn't just surviving. She was thriving, helping others along the way. And she knew that whatever came next, she was ready to face it. Linda stood at the podium, the weight of the shiny glass award in her hand, her heart a mix of pride and disbelief. She had just been recognized for her contributions to women's empowerment, an achievement she hadn't dreamed possible just a year ago. The room was filled with applause, but Linda's gaze wasn't on the crowd. It was on the award itself, its reflective surface catching the light. And in it, she saw a new version of herself, a woman who had gone from silence to strength. She had once been broken, betrayed, and lost in a sea of unspoken fears. But here she was now, standing tall, her heart full, her future wide open. She glanced at the people who had supported her along the way, friends, colleagues, and strangers who had become her community. This was no longer just her victory. It was a shared one. As she made her way back to her seat, the applause still ringing in her ears, Linda reflected on her journey, the years of pain, the moments when she felt like she had given all she could give, only to be left empty. The betrayal that had cut so deeply, the heartbreak that had seemed insurmountable. But from all of that she had built something new. Not just a life but a legacy. Linda had become a symbol of strength. Not because she hadn't been through the storm, but because she had emerged from it with grace and purpose. She had learned the power of saying no, of walking away from toxic relationships, and of creating a life she could be proud of. This award wasn't just recognition of her work. It was a testament to her own personal rebirth. Later that evening, as she read through the many congratulatory messages that had flooded in, one stood out. It was from Sophia. Linda hesitated before opening it, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The message was brief, filled with regret, a request for forgiveness. It was everything she had once longed to hear from her daughter. But as Linda read the words, she felt no anger, no sorrow. There was no bitterness, only a quiet certainty. She didn't need their approval anymore. She had spent so many years trying to fix things to make them see her worth. But now she knew that peace didn't come from them. It came from within her. She set the phone down, feeling a wave of contentment. Linda had built a life for herself, one that was free from guilt, from manipulation, and from the shadows of the past. She had found joy in the simple things. Time with friends, solo trips to new places, the freedom to make choices without hesitation or regret. Linda smiled as she looked out of the window where the city lights shimmered in the distance. She was content, truly at peace with the woman she had become. And the future, with all its uncertainty, didn't seem daunting anymore. It was just another adventure waiting to unfold. She had helped launch a new program for women looking to become financially independent, and it was already making waves. The success stories were pouring in, and Linda felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing that she was not just helping women stand on their own but helping them find their own strength just as she had. Her life was hers to shape now, and she wasn't going to waste another moment looking back. With every step she took, Linda knew she was moving forward toward a future that was hers and hers alone. The rebirth she had gone through wasn't just a moment in time. It was a way of life. As she stood up, ready to leave the event, she felt the warmth of the award in her hand. But more importantly, she felt something deeper. The quiet confidence that came from knowing she had found the life she was meant to live. And for the first time, Linda was exactly where she was supposed to be. She walked out into the night, her heart full, her mind clear, and the world waiting for her next step. The letter arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, its elegant seal embossed with the publisher's logo. Linda held it in her hands for a moment, hesitating before tearing open the envelope. She had already achieved so much, but this was something she had dreamed about for years. The letter inside was brief, but the words it contained were nothing short of transformative. Dear Linda, we are thrilled to inform you that Breaking Free, My Journey to Independence, has officially become a bestseller. Congratulations on this monumental achievement. Linda sat back, the words swimming before her eyes as her heart raced. She hadn't fully allowed herself to believe it. Sure, she had seen the success, the messages, the media attention, but to hear it from the publisher in black and white, it hit differently. The book was more than a personal triumph. It was a beacon for the women who needed it most. She set the letter down on the kitchen counter, her thoughts slowing down. The emotions that had been so intense for so long, anger, regret, fear, had faded. In their place, there was a new sense of peace, one she hadn't known was possible. She wasn't just at peace with her decisions. She was at peace with her, the woman she had become. The phone rang as she sipped her coffee, and Linda glanced at the screen. It was Sophia. She had called once before, but Linda had refused to answer. This time Linda didn't hesitate. She didn't feel the need to pick up. The pull of guilt was no longer there. She had already made her peace. It wasn't that she didn't care for her daughter. It was that Linda had learned to care for herself first. She had spent decades trying to fix what wasn't hers to fix. She had learned the hard way that boundaries weren't just necessary. They were vital for her own survival. The decision to cut off Sophia and Mark hadn't been easy, but it had been the right one. Linda smiled as she looked out the window at the bright blue sky, the birds soaring freely above. She felt lighter than she had in years. Her days were no longer filled with the weight of others' demands. She was free. She spent her mornings walking in the park, meditating and tending to her garden. A simple life, but one filled with purpose and joy. Her evenings were spent writing, diving deeper into projects she had put off for far too long. She also continued her work with the foundation, mentoring women who were on their own journeys of independence. Each woman she helped reminded Linda of how far she had come and how much she had to offer. Traveling was another joy she now fully embraced. She'd always dreamed of visiting places, small towns, hidden corners of the world, but it was always put aside for someone else's needs. Now she planned trips without guilt. Alone or with friends, Linda reveled in the freedom of exploring new places and new cultures. Yet even with all this, it was her peace of mind that she cherished the most. Linda no longer lived in the past. She wasn't haunted by Sophia's silence or Mark's manipulation. Their voices, once a constant echo in her head, had faded, leaving space for a new rhythm, one that beat to the sound of her own heart. And as the weeks passed, Linda realized something profound. She no longer regretted cutting off her daughter and son-in-law, not because she didn't love them, but because she had finally chosen herself. And that choice was the best thing she could have ever done. The future, once a daunting unknown, was now an open road. Linda had a clear mind, a full heart, and the strength to walk forward, knowing that she was free, and that nothing could take that away from her again. With a contented sigh, she closed her eyes, feeling the gentle warmth of the sun on her face. She had claimed her peace, and it was hers to keep. The ribbon fell to the ground with a soft snap, and the crowd erupted into applause. Linda stood at the front of the gathering, a wide smile on her face, watching as the grand opening of her foundation for women's financial empowerment came to life. The sleek new office was filled with women, all eager to take their first steps toward independence. The air buzzed with excitement and purpose, and Linda felt a deep sense of pride settle in her chest. This was it. This was her vision becoming a reality. The foundation had been something she had dreamed of for so long, a place where women could learn, grow, and find the tools they needed to secure their financial futures. It wasn't just about money. It was about the power that came with knowledge and self-reliance. As Linda looked around at the room, she could see the spark in the women's eyes. They were hungry for change, ready to take control. Sophia and Mark's absence was glaring. They hadn't reached out since Linda had made her final decision to sever ties. It had been a long time since she'd expected anything from them, and now their silence felt like a distant echo. Linda felt no bitterness, only an odd sense of peace. She had built this life for herself, a life that was no longer defined by their drama or expectations. It was hers, and it had nothing to do with their choices. The opening ceremony was a celebration. But for Linda, it was also a moment of reflection. She thought about how far she had come. From the woman who had been held hostage by guilt to the woman who stood confidently before a room full of women, empowering them to find their own strength. It wasn't easy to get here. There had been sacrifices, sleepless nights, and moments of doubt. But the reward was clear. Linda had created something that mattered, something that would continue to grow and help others. Later that evening, as Linda sat at her desk going through some of the feedback from the day's event, she couldn't help but smile. Her foundation had already begun to make an impact. Women were signing up for financial literacy courses, applying for scholarships, and sharing their own stories of overcoming obstacles. Linda had never imagined she would be able to touch so many lives, but here she was doing exactly that. The quiet life she had built for herself was a stark contrast to the chaos of her past. Linda spent her mornings walking through the park, breathing in the fresh air, and reflecting on the simple joys of life. She had filled her days with meaningful work, nurturing relationships with friends who truly supported her, and taking time to appreciate the little things like the feeling of the sun on her face or the sound of the birds singing outside her window. But she wasn't just living for herself. The women she worked with, mentored, and inspired filled her heart with a sense of purpose that nothing else could. She knew she had found her calling. And with every life she touched, Linda's confidence grew. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a force shaping the future one woman at a time. As Linda looked out the window, the city lights flickering in the distance, she thought about the future. She had no idea where it would take her. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel afraid. She was no longer held captive by fear or regret. She was free, and it was a freedom she had earned. The future was bright, and Linda was ready for whatever came next. Linda stood at the front of the grand hall, the spotlight casting her shadow on the floor. As she gazed out at the sea of faces, she could hear the rustle of programs, the low murmur of anticipation in the crowd. It was a National Women's Summit, an event that brought together powerful voices from across the country. Each one speaking about empowerment, independence, and the fight for equality. And now Linda was one of those voices. Her heart beat steadily, a calm rhythm she hadn't known in her former life. No more panic, no more second-guessing. This moment was hers. This was the culmination of years of growth, of letting go of the past, of reclaiming a life she had nearly lost. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her heels clicking on the stage, and the room fell silent. Linda didn't need a microphone. Didn't need anything other than the strength she had found within herself. She had lived it, and now she was here to share it. "I stand before you today," Linda began, her voice clear and strong. Not as a woman who's always had it together, not as someone who's never been hurt, but as someone who found power in her vulnerability, strength in her struggle. The audience was still listening intently. Linda could feel the weight of her own story. The journey from betrayal to empowerment, from self-doubt to unshakable confidence. She wasn't the woman she used to be, the one who had been swallowed by guilt and fear, constantly trying to fix things that weren't hers to fix. She had been broken, but now she was whole. I once believed I needed to sacrifice myself to make others happy. I thought love meant giving everything. Even when it cost me my peace, I gave until I had nothing left. Until I realized that what I thought was love was actually control and what I thought was strength was just survival. She paused, allowing the words to settle, to take root in the hearts of those listening. Linda had spoken these words before to herself in the quiet of her own mind. But now, standing in front of hundreds of women, it felt different. She wasn't just telling her story. She was living it, showing them what was possible when you decided to break free. For so long, she continued, her voice steady. I let the toxic expectations of my family, my daughter, and my son-in-law define me. I allowed their need for me to be their savior to strip away pieces of who I was. But the truth is, they weren't the ones who needed saving. It was. And it took me losing everything I thought I needed to find everything I had been searching for. The crowd was silent, but Linda could feel the shift. She wasn't speaking just to them. She was speaking for them. For every woman who had ever felt small. For every woman who had been told she wasn't enough. For every woman who had sacrificed her own happiness to care for others. And then I chose myself, she said, her voice stronger now, a fire burning in her chest. I chose peace over guilt, independence over obligation, and love over sacrifice. And when I did that, something incredible happened. I found the strength to build the life I wanted, not the one others had planned for me. And so can you. An applause started slowly, almost tentatively, as if the room wasn't sure what to do with the power of Linda's words, but as it grew, so did the sense of connection. Linda knew without a doubt that she had touched something deep inside each of them. She was no longer just a woman sharing her story. She was a beacon of possibility, showing others that they too could reclaim their lives. Her chest swelled with pride. But it wasn't the applause that made her feel accomplished. It was the realization that she had made a difference. She had done what she set out to do. She had empowered others. She had given them the permission to choose themselves just as she had. As the noise from the crowd subsided, Linda looked out into the faces before her. They weren't just spectators. They were her community, her sisters in strength, her partners in this shared journey. She had built something greater than herself, a movement, a foundation for women to reclaim their power, their voice, their independence. Linda smiled as the last few waves of applause filled the room. It was a smile of contentment, of peace. She had no idea what the future held. But for the first time it didn't matter. She was no longer bound by the toxic expectations of her family, nor the weight of the past. She had become someone she could be proud of. The final thought that crossed her mind as she stepped off the stage and walked back to her seat was simple. They thought they could break me, but I became a woman they could never touch. And as she sat down, her heart swelling with a quiet, unshakable confidence, Linda knew she had become the woman she was always meant to.